I'm 109 years old. In 3 weeks, I turn 110. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand something about memory that no one wants to say out loud. Everyone talks about losing your mind like it's something that happens to other people, like it's a disease you catch if you're unlucky. But I've watched it happen to almost everyone I've ever known, and I've stayed sharp enough to see the pattern. And the pattern is this: we do it to ourselves. Not all of it, not the genetics or the plaques or whatever the doctors measure on their scans, but the part that matters most, the part where your brain either stays alive or starts dying decades before your body does. I'm not here to sell you supplements or tell you to do crossword puzzles. I'm here because I've outlived 3 generations of friends, 2 wives, my children, and most of my grandchildren. And I've spent the last 20 years watching what happened to their minds before they died compared to what didn't happen to mine. And I think I know why. This isn't about me being special. It's about me being stubborn in ways that accidentally kept me conscious. Let me go back. I was born in 1917. I'm not going to waste time on the century I've seen because you already know that part. What you don't know is what I started noticing in my 60s and 70s when people around me began disappearing inside their own heads. My first wife, Dorothy, started losing words when she was 73. We'd been married 51 years, little things first. She'd point at the kettle and say, "the hot thing." Then she'd forget our grandchildren's names. By 76, she didn't know who I was most days. She died at 79, and the last 2 years she was alive, she wasn't really there. But here's what I remember that no one wanted to talk about. Dorothy had stopped learning anything new at 60, not because she was sick, because she decided she was done. She'd raised 4 kids, kept a house, worked part-time at the library for 30 years. When she retired at 60, she said, "I've earned my rest." And she meant it. She stopped reading new books, just reread the same Agatha Christie novels, stopped going to new places, stopped meeting new people. She had her routine, her television shows, her grocery day, her church on Sunday. I didn't think anything of it then. I thought that's what you did when you got old. You shrunk your life down to what was comfortable. But then I watched it happen to my brother Carl. He was 68 when he retired from the factory. 43 years on the same assembly line. He and his wife Maureen moved to Florida, bought a condo, and he spent the next 15 years playing golf and watching sports. Same foursome every Thursday, same restaurants, same conversations about the same games. By 80, he didn't remember my name. By 83, he was in a home. He died at 85, and the last time I visited him, he thought I was our father. Then my friend Eugene. We'd worked together for 31 years at the rail yard. Sharp guy, did the crossword every morning in pen, remembered everyone's birthday. He retired at 65, said he was going to travel, learn to paint, all the things he'd put off. He did none of it. Instead, he stayed home, watched the news all day, got angry about politics, about the world changing, about young people. By 70, every conversation was the same complaint. By 75, he repeated the same 3 stories every time I saw him. By 78, he was diagnosed. He lasted until 81, but he was gone long before that. I started keeping a list in my head, not formal, just noticing. Everyone I knew who made it past 80, I paid attention to what their mind was like. The ones who lost it all had something in common. They stopped challenging their brain between 60 and 70. They retired and treated the rest of life like a waiting room. The ones who stayed sharp, there weren't many, but the ones who did had something else in common. They kept learning, not as a hobby, not as therapy, but because they stayed genuinely curious about something. Let me tell you about Margaret. I met her when I was 86 at the community center where I used to volunteer teaching woodworking. She was 91. She'd just signed up for a computer class because her great-grandson was teaching himself to code and she wanted to understand what he was talking about. 91 years old, learning to use a computer from scratch. She didn't become an expert, but she learned enough to send emails, to look things up, to video call her family. And more importantly, she kept learning other things. Took a class on local history. Started volunteering at the food bank, which meant learning new systems, new people, new routines every week. I had lunch with her every few months until she died at 98. Her mind was clear the whole time. Not perfect, she forgot things. But she knew who she was, who I was, what day it was. She could follow a conversation. She could laugh at new jokes. Compare that to my second wife, Linda. I married her when I was 78, and she was 74. We had 12 good years. Then something shifted. She'd always been social, active, involved in everything. But around 86, she started pulling back, said she was tired, said she'd done enough, started declining invitations, stopped going to her book club, stopped taking the pottery classes she'd loved. I tried to encourage her, but she'd get frustrated with me. "I'm 86 years old," she'd say. "I've earned the right to relax." Within 2 years, I watched her fade. Not her body, her mind. She started asking me the same questions multiple times a day, got confused about whether she'd eaten, stopped being able to follow the plot of a movie. By 90, she needed full-time care. She died at 92, and the last year, she thought I was her first husband, dead 40 years. I'm not saying learning things prevents dementia. I'm saying stopping learning invites it in early. Here's what I think happens, and I'm not a doctor, but I've watched this for 50 years. Your brain is like a path through the woods. The paths you use stay clear. The paths you stop using grow over. And if you stop cutting new paths, eventually the whole forest becomes impassable. When you retire, when you stop working, when you stop having to learn new names and new systems and new problems, your brain starts pruning everything you're not using. And if all you're doing is the same routine every day, watching the same shows, seeing the same people, having the same conversations, your brain starts pruning almost everything. It starts with recent memory because that's the newest, least reinforced path. Then it moves backward. Eventually you're living in the past because that's all that's left. But if you keep learning, even small things, you force your brain to keep building. You keep those pathways active, you keep the machinery running. I'm 109, and I still learn something new every week. Not because I'm disciplined, because I got scared watching everyone I loved disappear, and I decided I'd rather die with my mind intact than live 20 years as a ghost. After Linda died, I was 90. I started learning languages, not fluently, I'm not talented, but I'd work on Spanish for a year, using books and tapes, then switch to Italian, then try French. I'd get to where I could hold a basic conversation, then move on. I didn't need to master them. I needed to make my brain work. I took up piano at 94. I'm terrible, but I practice twice a week, and I can play a dozen simple songs now. I learned to use a smartphone at 97. Took me 4 months to feel comfortable with it. Now I read news, watch videos, message my great-great-grandchildren. I relearned mathematics at 102 because I'd forgotten most of it and thought it might be useful to understand statistics when people argue about studies. I started learning about astronomy at 105 because my great-great-grandson is obsessed with it and I wanted to understand what excited him. None of this makes me impressive. It makes me functional. The people I know now who are in their 70s and 80s, I watch them make the same choice Dorothy and Carl and Eugene made. They retire and they stop. They say they're tired. They say they've earned rest. And I want to grab them and say, rest your body, not your brain. Because here's what no one tells you. Dementia doesn't start when you're diagnosed. It starts 20, 30 years earlier when you stop challenging yourself, when you stop being uncomfortable, when you stop learning. You want to protect your brain? Stop treating 60 or 70 like you're done. You don't have to learn piano or languages, but you have to learn something that frustrates you, something where you're a beginner, something that makes you feel stupid for a while. Take a class in something you know nothing about. Learn to use technology you don't understand. Pick up a skill that's completely outside your experience. Read books on subjects you've never explored. Have conversations with people who think differently than you do. And do it regularly, not once, not as a phase, as a permanent part of your life. Your brain doesn't care what you learn. It cares that you're learning, that you're forming new connections, new pathways, new patterns. If I could go back and talk to Dorothy at 60, I'd tell her, don't stop. You don't have to work, but don't stop growing. Take a class. Learn something useless. Be bad at something new. If I could talk to Carl before he retired, I'd say golf is fine, but it's not enough. Your brain needs problems it hasn't solved before. Find something that challenges you every week. What I didn't understand until I was in my 90s was that learning isn't something you do when you're young and stop when you're old. It's the thing that keeps you alive inside your own head. The tragedy isn't that people get dementia. The tragedy is how many people get it earlier and worse than they had to because they spent 20 years letting their brain atrophy. I'm not saying I'll never lose my mind. Maybe tomorrow I'll wake up and forget where I am. Maybe this is my last clear year. But I've had 49 more clear years than Dorothy, 30 more than Carl, 28 more than Eugene. And the only difference between us was that I stayed uncomfortable. Here's what I'd tell you if you're in your 60s, 70s, even 80s, it's not too late. Your brain can still build new pathways. It's harder than it was at 20, but it's possible, and the effort is worth it. Don't learn things to be productive. Learn things to stay awake. Don't take classes to build a new career. Take them to build new neurons. Don't read about new subjects to impress anyone. Read them to keep your brain from cannibalizing itself. And if you're younger, in your 40s or 50s, hear this. The choices you make now set the pattern. If you're already narrowing your life, already sticking to routines, already avoiding discomfort, you're training your brain for decline. Retirement shouldn't mean stopping. It should mean freedom to learn things you never had time for. 3 books I'd recommend if this resonates. The Brain That Changes Itself by Norman Doidge. It's about neuroplasticity, about how the brain adapts. Being Mortal by Atul Gawande. It's about aging and what matters at the end. And Keep Sharp by Sanjay Gupta. It's specifically about brain health and memory. I'm 109 years old. In 3 weeks, I turn 110. I don't know how many clear days I have left. Maybe thousands, maybe 12, but I know I'm recording this, speaking to you because my brain still works. And it still works because I never let it rest. If this meant something to you, I'm glad I told you. There are more stories like this if you want to hear them. And if you have thoughts about this, I'd be interested to know. Leave them if you're willing. I'll end with this. Your mind is the only thing you take with you all the way to the end. Everything else falls away. Your job, your house, your strength, your beauty. But your mind, if you protect it, stays with you. Protect it. Not someday. Now.